This is RTP. This is RTP180.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Wade, for that introduction. My name is Tania Munz, and I'm, as Wade said, the VP for Scholarly Programs at the National Humanities Center. My talk today is entitled, Nerds in the Woods, or Why the Humanities Matter. So, why nerds in the woods? Well, we're located in the woods, just off of T.W. Alexander Drive. We've been there for just a little over 40 years, and we're one of the leading institutes for advanced study, and we're the only one exclusively dedicated to the humanities. And by humanities, we mean the subjects like history, classics, literature, those kinds of non-STEM subjects. Yeah, thank you. Somebody who doesn't need convincing. And so every year in mid-October, we get 500, 600 plus applications from scholars all over the world who want to come to the National Humanities Center to pursue their research projects. We have hundreds of external reviewers, and they help us put together a class of up to 40 scholars in the humanities who then spend the year or the semester with us. So there you have it, nerds in the woods. And though if you, and I should say before I move on, I do want to say, and I think I'm in good company here, that when I say nerds, I mean that with a great deal of affection and respect and a little bit of kinship as well. But so the question remains, why do the humanities matter? And I think when we think about a research institute exclusively dedicated to the humanities and having scholars spend a year there reading, thinking, writing, it may seem like a strange kind of luxury, especially in this kind of age when we're undeniably STEM obsessed and we think about other things that we might consider more relevant. So I'm going to try to convince you that the humanities really do matter by introducing you to two of our former fellows. On the left is Jud Herman. He's professor of history and classics at Allegheny College. And on the right is Laura Murphy, and she is an associate professor of English at Loyola University in New Orleans, and she is also the director of the Modern Slavery Research Project. When Jud Herman was at the National Humanities Center, he worked on what's called the Archimedes palimpsest. A palimpsest is a document that has been written on top of another kind of document. So in the Middle Ages, when this particular book that you see up top was put together, the scribes repurposed this very precious animal skin. They washed it and scraped it and just wrote a prayer book on top of it. But sometimes it happens that we're actually more interested in the text that's underneath, that's been washed away or that's been lost than in maybe the 13th century prayer book. And that was the case with this particular document. In particular, Jud Herman worked on two speeches that had never before been seen, that had been lost since the 13th century by Hyperides. Hyperides was active in the 4th century BC. He was in Athens. He was a famous orator and politician, so he was a contemporary with Aristotle. And what one of these speeches contains is a reflection on a battle that the Athenians lost in the 4th century BC. And it gives us, for the first time in hundreds of years, a glimpse of what it felt like for the Athenians to have lost this battle. It was the end of the Greek city-states, and it really was the end of Greek democracy. So we have insight into what that may have been like. And if you think about it, right, empires rise and they fall, and people live through those times. But if classics isn't your thing, we're going to talk about Laura Murphy next. And Laura Murphy was trained in African studies and African American studies, and she was trained as a literary scholar. And as she was preparing for her PhD exams, she was reading slave narratives from the 19th century on the transatlantic slave trade. And as she was doing these readings, she started to come across more and more accounts of people who were contemporaries now, who are enslaved and who are being trafficked. And gradually, she shifted her focus to actually work on modern-day slavery. And currently, conservative estimates put modern-day human trafficking, people who are enslaved, who are working without pay, under the threat of violence, who cannot leave their situations, at 27 million. And so that's a conservative estimate. Laura Murphy, as the director of the Modern Slavery Research Project, also interviewed over 600 youths who are homeless and interview them about what it's like to be living on the streets, and talk to them about their experiences with human trafficking as well. Her book, Survivors of Slavery, was published in 2014, gives voice to close to 40 people who have suffered modern-day slavery. So when we think about her work as a humanist, we might ask, why does somebody need to be trained in literary studies to do this kind of work, right? It's not necessarily obvious. But one of the things that Laura says is that her training in literature allowed her to read against the grain and to better understand that narrators may not be reliable, but they have important stories to tell nonetheless. So she, through this work, teaches people how to talk to victims who have been trafficked in ways that allow them to tell their stories. She works with law enforcement officers, she works with social workers, and she is the subject area expert for the US Department of Health and Human Services. So hopefully I've convinced you, at least with these two stories, how the humanities can matter. And over the last 40 years, we've had over 1,500 scholars at the National Humanities Center who come here to RTP to do their work, and together they've written over 1,600 books as a result of their time at the center. If you'd like to learn more, you should, thank you. If you'd like to learn more, please follow us on social media, sign up for our newsletter. Next month, we have a discussion on Italian fascism, memory, and monuments. And in November, and this is super exciting, Seymour Hersh, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, is going to come to the center to give a talk. So I hope to see you there. Thank you.